This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. It's been dangerously hot in the old North State, but our panel has some cool discussion for you. Governor Cooper says it's going to be 2023 before we recover from COVID-19, and we examine why. Each of our state-supported universities has been told to submit plans how to cut between 25 and 50% of their budgets. And we wonder why so many school systems have opted for Plan C online learning, even after the governor recommended Plan B. Well, of course, we're going to have the panel tell us something we don't know. Speaking of which, this week's panel includes Cash Michaels, a journalist and filmmaker, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom, and last but certainly not least, Becki Gray, the vice president of the John Locke Foundation. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
Let's begin the spin. Well, it might seem that it's not such a good time to think about how and when North Carolina will recover from the coronavirus, but it is a good time. Governor Cooper asked the federal government for help with the $5 billion projected shortfall we're having and estimated it might be 2023 before we fully recover. Chris, last month we saw our unemployment numbers drop from 12.7% in May to 7.6% in June. That's good news, but American Airlines followed by announcing they were furloughing 2,600 employees October 1. Is the governor right about how long it's going to take us to recover?
Well, I certainly think he's right that we're going to be feeling the effects for a long time. The American Airlines announcement was, while not surprising, disappointing. We also, though, got some news that Amazon was creating some jobs. I think that we all in this show a lot of times focus on the big job announcements or the big announcements that a lot of jobs are leaving, but it's the day-to-day small and medium businesses, I think, that really matter. But a lot of people are, I think one of the reasons we don't know exactly is we're still in the middle of this pandemic. We're at a record hospitalization rate, or at least the highest one we've had in North Carolina. And it feels like a lot of people, even President Trump, are starting to finally realize the way to bring the economy back in a pandemic is to address the pandemic. And that's the only way people are going to have confidence and really go back to work. I think we're going to see fluctuating unemployment numbers for a while until people are confident that it's safe to go out, spend money, go to work, and do the things they normally do.
Governor Cooper has written all of our congressional delegation and the federal government asking them to send our state what he calls robust and flexible money to spend. In the meantime, we got $3.5 billion in this CARES Act funding. And Becki, we've only spent about $2.1 million. Should the legislature come back into town and go ahead and allocate or appropriate the rest of that money so that we can help our communities?
Well, I think that is absolutely the plan. The General Assembly plans to come back September 2nd. And you mentioned the flexibility that Congress is being asked to allocate and to authorize for. It's not just Governor Cooper that's asking for this. There are many states, many groups across the country that are asking for more flexibility in how that money can be spent. So the General Assembly, in my view, very wisely set aside, didn't spend all of the money that we have coming in. They're waiting to see a couple things. One, how the impact of the pandemic continues to affect North Carolinians, where that money can most effectively be spent, and then also if the flexibility is granted from the federal government, it gives them more flexibility in getting that money to people and areas that really need it.
Cash, talking about money and flexibility, the legislature is being asked to come back also and do something about our unemployment insurance fund. We have one of the stingiest unemployment plans in the nation. In 2013, the legislature cut it from $535 a week benefits down to $350 a week benefits, and at the same time cut the period where people can receive it from 20 weeks down to approximately 13 weeks. So the legislature has been asked to do something to help with those unemployment benefits. Do you agree they ought to come back and do that now?
And there's no question. If you've been out of work in this state, then you know just how bad that is. Also, the $600 unemployment help that we were getting from the federal government, that has run out as of this weekend. And so a lot of folks now are going to be dependent on that if there's any of it left. I don't know how much time is left from, well, I guess people get the money depending on
through
when
the
they're
31st
approved.
of July, yeah.
Right. But the bottom line, though, is that by now it's very clear that North Carolina, being at the bottom of the barrel for those funds, should do something to improve it. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Senate wanted to raise it from $350 to $400 a week, but the House wouldn't go for it.
Yeah, and we've got $3 billion in that trust fund. John, Cash alluded to the $600 a week payment that the feds have been helping with people who are unemployed. Congress is right now just snarled up, trying to figure out what to do so far as a next relief package is concerned, whether or not they're going to extend that benefit. Let's play what if. What if they don't do it? What if these unemployed people don't get that $600 that they've been receiving? What's going to happen?
Some will take jobs that they're currently passing on because the wages from the jobs are lower than the unemployment benefit with the extra federal bonus. Others will have a hard time paying their bills. So it's one of these cases where you can describe a particular example of either effect. I think it is certainly demonstrable that the $600 a week bonus has helped a lot of people get through the crisis and has increased unemployment. It's made it harder for employers to get workers as they've reopened. We have this weird situation. We have a high unemployment rate and we have a labor shortage, which is not typical. So I think Congress is going to, among other things, extend some kind of supplemental federal bonus for weekly unemployment insurance benefits. I don't think it'll be $600. It'll be something lower because the disincentive effects to take jobs and the effects on the economic recovery are simply too large.
I'm hearing that it might be tied to a percentage of what they were previously earning. Chris, Governor Cooper this week, in what I think was sort of an uncharacteristic move for him, most of us who've known him for any period of time, really got upset with people who aren't wearing masks. He said they were selfish. Here's his quote: "For those who continue to defy basic decency and common sense because they refuse to wear a mask, either wear one or don't go in the store. The refusal to wear a mask is selfish. It infringes on the life and liberty of everyone in the store." What's your comment to Cooper's remarks?
Well, I think he's right. You know, the CDC, the Trump administration itself, on April 3rd said it was a good idea to wear a mask to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. President Trump this past week himself finally appeared at the presidential podium and said the same thing. So it is one of the things we can do. The easiest things people can do is when you're with other people in any sort of contact, wear a mask. It's not that complicated. I thought the governor was right.
Becki, let's talk a little bit about the economy and people in North Carolina. The governor had issued an executive order saying that if you didn't pay your water bill or your light bill, that they wouldn't cut your utilities off. Well, that expires the end of next week. Where does that stand so far as what's going to happen to these people?
Well, you know, as John mentioned, you know, people who don't have jobs are going to start to be having a problem paying their bills. You know, all of these things, whether it's the unemployment benefits, whether it's wearing a mask, whether it's people being able to pay their utility bills and their rent and other things, this is all moving towards the answer is to get the economy back going, get people back to work, get the revenue coming into the state to meet the state's needs, and getting money coming into people's homes. So I think with all of this whole discussion, the answer to all of these problems, now it may be a little bit more long term, but the answer is to get the economy going, get people back to work, get people able to take care of themselves and their family without looking to Congress or a governmental waiver or any of these other things.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. A lot of people, though, are sort of afraid still of going out and eating in restaurants and shopping in stores. John, the question I want to raise right now is kind of switching gears. If you remember on this show, we talked about the fact that the Republican National Convention Committee was pulling the convention from North Carolina. Well, this week we are told that all of the hoopla that they had about moving the whole thing to Jacksonville, Florida, they're not going to be doing it there either. What's your reaction to that announcement?
I always thought it was odd for Republicans, for example, in North Carolina, who are critical of Roy Cooper's handling of the situation, which I have been critical about aspects of what he's done. I thought it was odd for them to choose a large indoor gathering as their championed issue, because that's like the last thing that you would bring back as you reopen the economy is large numbers of people in an enclosed space. So I wasn't surprised, particularly as things have developed over the last several weeks. I think that you've got to, if you are a believer that we have to balance the public health initiatives to combat the spread of coronavirus with the ability of people to get out and make a living and provide goods and services to others, I don't think that maintaining a traditional political convention was your best theme.
Particularly when you're a hot spot like Jacksonville is right now. Cash, there is some good news in all of this. The good news is that North Carolinians are either discovering or rediscovering their state. We are hearing reports from people on the coast and on the mountains and state parks that they're seeing a lot of visitors, and most of them are in-state visitors. Is this going to be a permanent situation, or at least one to go on for some period of time?
Tom, North Carolina has so much to offer, and it is a shame that it takes a pandemic for many of us who've lived here for some time to discover it. I'll admit, as a transported Yankee down here, I haven't seen maybe 10% of the state since I've been here, and I've been here for 20 years. So I think that this is a good thing, that it's a positive. It gets people out of the house. And it helps to pour some money back into North Carolina's economy.
A lot of day trips you can make across North Carolina that are just absolutely fascinating, scenic areas, resort areas, great ways to be able to spend time. Chris, a lot of people had hoped that the recovery to this pandemic was going to be sort of a U-shaped curve, from the standpoint that we plunged down very quickly and it was going to come back up very quickly. It is now looking like that's not the case. Would you agree?
Well, that's certainly what the statistics show. As I mentioned in an earlier comment, North Carolina now has more people in the hospital than we have had since this pandemic began. And I think as we see the Sun Belt especially, all the way to Arizona, California, Texas, Florida, it's not a coincidence that the states with the worst cases were the ones who, Georgia, are the ones who rushed to reopen the fastest. It's not rocket science, really. And I go back to the comment, folks who are, and I am too, so interested in getting the economy restarted. The way to do that is to get the pandemic under control. It's not to open things too fast. And I'm worried that even Governor Cooper, I think, has done a reasonably good job. I worry that we might have moved a little too fast, despite lawsuits and all sorts of other things.
Our legislature has been told to expect a revenue shortfall for state government revenues of about $4 billion this year. In order to balance a state budget as is required, every state agency is likely going to face budget cuts. And last week, the UNC Board of Governors Chairman Randall Ramsey sent emails to the constituent universities asking them to send him several documents, which included a plan from each chancellor for how to reduce their budgets between 25 and 50%, the financial impact of closing their campuses and reducing tuition and room fees, and a projection of how the cancellation of fall athletics is going to affect them. Becki, Ramsey told the chancellors this wasn't a request, it was a directive, and they're to respond quickly with specifics about programs to cut, people to be furloughed, sent shockwaves through the university system. Does Ramsey has he gotten some marching orders from the legislative leaders, or is he just planning ahead?
I think he's planning ahead. I think he got his marching orders or is taking directive from the economy and watching what's happening. Particularly in a lot of these services like higher education and the way it is delivered. And many students are evaluating what they get for the dollars they're spending in higher education. And then, of course, with the shutdowns and the restrictions on how they can deliver their products and what that's going to look like is going to be very different. I commend the Board of Governors and Chairman Ramsey for doing this. Hopefully this is a worst-case scenario, but I think we need to be prepared for it. What I'd like to see is other state agencies. I'd like to hear that from Governor Cooper of his administration and telling the departments, what are we going to do? Because as we've talked throughout this show, the impact on our economy, we don't know how long it's going to be, but what we do know is no one is going to come out of this unscathed.
Yes.
And as responsibility for the government to respond to that as well. So I commend the Board of Governors for this. That's a big cut, 50% of the universities, but I think you have to be prepared for it. And Tom, just on a positive note, I would also suggest that this is a real opportunity not only for the university system but across state government to reevaluate how we do things, looking for efficiencies. Can we combine some things? Are we doing it in the most cost-effective way that we need to do? And also recognizing that not only higher education, but a lot of things may look very different, not just in the immediate future, but forever.
Yes. John, you, among others, most of us, have been very complimentary of the fact that the Board of Governors chose Peter Hans to become our president. He takes office August 1. Boy, what a tough time to be coming in. The big question the universities are facing right now is how are they going to get these students back on campus safely in dorms, in cafeterias, in classrooms? They seem to be fairly intent on having in-class instruction, don't they?
They do, and the students do, for the most part. The students want to be on campus. If the university was not to open this fall, they would have a significant drop in enrollment because a lot of students simply are not going to be interested in paying even a reduced amount of money for what they consider to be an impoverished experience. I've both taken and taught online courses in recent years. They have a lot of value. There are some things you can teach well, but particularly with undergraduates, the college experience itself is important. And so that's one of the reasons why students and their parents really have, of course there are counterexamples. There are students who don't want to go back to campus. I understand that too. But most of the students appear to want to go back. The university wants them there. And you should expect there to be infections. You should expect there to be cases. There are going to be cases. Anytime anything opens, there are going to be some people who catch the virus and spread the virus. That's the nature of it.
The biggest pushback seems to be coming from faculty, I think. The UNC Board of Governors took another step this past week, Chris, in which they said that if, for whatever reason, they have to revert back to all online instruction, they will not give the students back their tuition or fees or dorm payments. What do you think of that decision?
Well, it puts them in an impossible situation if they do that. They still are having to pay all the instructors. They're having to pay a lot of the expenses associated with providing that education. They softened that. I think that there will be some measure of compromise on that. I don't think they'll be able to refund the entire cost, but I do think there'll be some accommodation if it's all online only. And it's worth noting, as we talk about this in North Carolina specific terms, which is our job, every state in the country is wrestling with this. Yes. California is going online only the first semester. Every private school is wrestling with this. It's a national phenomenon, obviously.
Cash, Chairman.
It's worth pointing out real quick, Tom, I think that the fees and then the room and board are being treated differently.
Yes. Chairman Ramsey, Cash, indicated that they had to plan for what was going to happen if they lost their football revenues. I think he is sending a preliminary message that we may not be playing football in colleges and universities. Is that what you got?
Hey, listen, if they haven't started practicing by now, or at least planning to practice, then it's not going to happen. You and I know that football practice normally starts around August or so, and there's been no mention of any football practice that I'm aware of.
And football. canceled it, right? Has canceled
Yes,
fall sport.
CIAA is canceled. I think MEAC is canceled too. And if I'm not mistaken, well, like I said, football, there's no practice that I'm hearing about. And as you well know, Tom, football, basketball, but football in particular, raises millions of dollars for each institution.
It's a
Even if
money
you're playing
money
bad
maker
team.
for them. Yeah.
And without it, they're in serious trouble. No question about it.
I'd like to go around the horn very quickly because we're running out of time for this segment. But if you were a chancellor at one of these universities that's been directed to cut 25 to 50%, give me a quick list of the things that you would be cutting first. John?
If you're in the 25 to 50% range, you're cutting personnel. You're reducing the staffing levels. You're probably focusing on the personnel who either generate the highest value research or the ones who teach the most classes.
Interesting. Cash?
I agree with John.
Chris?
Well, you can't cut 50% without devastating the whole system. I mean, the whole university. But I do think they will start with non-instructional personnel. They'll start with electives. But 50% cut would be insane.
Becki?
I would start with the administration and really looking at that. What do we need? What we don't need? What can we do well? And then also if you're going to transition to more online learning, are there some classes that you could teach a greater number of students with fewer teachers and redirect some of those things? Just really looking for efficiencies to how to make it work better.
Last week we talked about Governor Cooper's recommendations for opening public schools and the pushback he was getting from recommending Plan B. He wanted to have these schools have social distancing, smaller class sizes, face masks. The legislature wanted all in-class instruction for the first few days. But in this past week, school systems with more than 20%, actually it's 45% of our 1.6 million public school students have opted to open online instruction. Educators, leaders, parents say it ain't safe. Cash, are our parents out ahead of our political leaders?
Always. You know, Tom, parents have skin in this game. They barely trust schools to teach their children. When it comes to safety, if there's any question whether or not their child will be safe at all, they just point blank lean to the side of safety. And so you can't blame parents for saying, I've got a computer at home and my child can use it.
I want to ask the question. This past week, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, who has been urging in-class instruction for this coming year, got very critical of schools. He said the systems are failing the children that they're supposed to be helping, and he urged the parents to send kids to private schools. Your reaction to this, John?
Of course, that's what some of them are doing. Private schools are now having to turn away parents. The parents aren't the ones that insisted the schools be shut down. Most parents want the schools to be open.
What's
it's
your reaction
teachers.
to Berger's comments, though? That's my question.
He is simply stating a reality that parents have to educate their children and get back to work somehow, so you've got to have to use private schools and homeschooling as an alternative.
Chris, the head of the Public School Forum of North Carolina, said, quote, instead of directing taxpayer dollars into private settings that are not required to demonstrate to the public that they're ensuring each and every child is accessing a sound basic education, let's ensure our system of public schools, one of our great and most important assets, has the funding necessary to begin the school year. Agree or disagree with her?
I totally agree. I thought Senator Berger's comments were troubling. Instead of encouraging people to send their kids to private schools, why don't we come up with plans and fund the additional safety precautions at our public schools? It's worth noting a study is coming out with it's been announced. 60-something thousand Korean kids, 10 to 19, are just as likely to spread the virus as adults. So it's not true that kids who are 12 years old can't spread the virus to their family.
All right, we got 2 minutes left in show. I'm going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Becki.
Well, what you may know is that State Auditor Beth Woods has discovered recently with the DOT that there's close to $40 million in illegal salaries. What you may not know is State Treasurer Dale Falwell has now discovered that those increases in salaries add almost $180 million to the pension liability.
Yeah.
So this goes on and on. The problems at DOT are wide and deep.
Chris, tell us something we don't know.
thought it was fascinating that 50 charter schools in North Carolina received PPP money from the federal government, even though they still get their money from the state for each student that's there. Many of those same schools got federal CARES money. It does raise a question: why then do traditional public schools not have the same opportunity to get federal assistance?
Cash, I got a minute left. Tell us something we don't know.
In a perfect world, Governor Roy Cooper will get a clip of President Trump announcing the cancellation of the Jacksonville Republican Convention, and he'll put it in his next campaign commercial and say, "I told you so."
All right, John, tell us something we don't know.
Crime is spiking in North Carolina's largest city. The murder rate in Charlotte last year was the highest in a generation. This year, it's running ahead of last year.
To what do we attribute that?
There's a lot of causes, probably reduced policing. They're not policing as much as they used to.
A lot of frustration on people having to be restricted and so forth also, I think.
And the pandemic
no question
creates more opportunities for crime.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And while on the website, be sure to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter, to our podcast, and the NC Spin YouTube channel. Next week, 2 of North Carolina's top political scientists join the panel. Until that time, stay informed and watch out for the spin. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.